Sabah al-Khair, good morning, dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Bringing you the news and views and the untold side of the Palestinian struggle for freedom from a Palestinian perspective. Good morning, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Palestine Remembered. Today we're joined by Sara, Saleh, who's going to be on the panel, Human Rights and the Palestine Laboratory in the Age of Surveillance. Make sure you go to the podcast to get details, but you can get all the ticket details where it's at. Tuesday, 5th of September, 6:30 at RMIT, freepalestinevic.org, freepalestinevic.org. There'll be a link in the podcast as well. But this morning we've got Sara Saleh, who will be joining Anthony. Sara has just published a book. How super duper exciting, Sara. Congratulations.
Thank you, Nasser. Thank you so much for having me on your show today. And thank you for the kind words. It honestly still feels very surreal, but I'm ready. I'm ready to let it go, let it be free out in the world.
You are awesome. You know, I'm one of your biggest fans and I'm so very, very excited. The book is called Songs for the Dead and the Living. And it's got this gorgeous cover. Listeners, there'll be a link to buy the book in the podcast. And if you come along on Tuesday the 5th, Sara will sign a copy for you. There'll be books for sale there too. Tell me about the cover, the artwork there.
Oh, definitely. I will be so excited to sign copies and to sell books with the cover because it is extraordinary and it is by none other than the most amazing Palestinian artist who you might have come across before, Nasser, Malak Matar. So Malak Matar's work I have been a fan of for quite some time now. And when my publishers and I discussed who would be the kind of perfect artist to whose painting or whose work would be the cover and would honor, my words. Honestly, there was no two ways about it. We just immediately both landed on Malak Matar, and I was so thrilled that she said yes.
I know, it's gorgeous, and it's worth the price of the book just to get that piece of art. How does it feel to be a published author?
I still haven't really quite believed it yet. I think it's still kind of in my mind, it feels like this distant thing. Like, obviously, as someone who has published work before and has had discrete, stories or poems, essays, that kind of thing in anthologies, multiple times. And I've even co-edited my own anthology. This still feels quite different. It feels like very vulnerable. Like I'm out here on my own on the ledge. Whereas, when you're in an anthology, when you're with other artists, there is that kind of collective feeling and collective safety. But now it's just me, myself, and my words. And so, and of course, it takes a village to put together a book and to have it out there, to get it to a point where it's ready to be out there in the world. But ultimately, I think you feel like the successes are collective, but the failures, if any, or the kind of the gaps are your own. And so, yeah, it's a lot exhilarating and a very, very a lot terrifying.
Most of your other work, like a couple of books I've got, have been those anthologies, but also poetry. Is this the first novel?
Yeah, so this is the first long form novel, more than 10,000 word type work. So it is, it was definitely one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my artistic career.
So how do you come to the idea and formulate it? What's the process of pitching? If you're J.K. Rowling, a nice white woman, you can just say, I'm writing a book, and they'll send advance funds.
That's right. And not get cancelled for problematic politics either. Yeah, I definitely didn't have that privilege or luxury. Look, it's a bit of I was very lucky that I have been involved in writing communities here in Sydney for quite some time now. And I think being part of those communities and building relationships was one part of it, yes, but also really working on my craft, my discipline as a writer for the last 10 years to feel like I'm at a point where I'm ready to even begin to think about a novel. And quite frankly, one of my mentors and editors, Dr. Michael Muhammad Ahmed, was the person who was really the most encouraging of me and said, you're ready, it's time. And he kind of knew it before I did. And I was like, no, I'm not ready. I need at least another 10 more years of, working on my craft and working on my discipline. He's like, no, Sara, you are definitely ready. Trust me, I know you can do this. And I think just having that little boost of confidence and support really helped me feel like, ready to take it out into the world. So as I was in discussions with the publisher, I was also, and nothing had been locked in yet, they had offered, this mentorship, which was one part of it. But the other part was actually thinking, all right, what do I want to write about now that I've actually potentially got this opportunity on my doorstep and I don't want to waste it. What is it that I want to write about? And luckily at the time, so I had been writing a short story for this collection called Racism, also head by Michael Muhammad and for Sweatshop. And while I was writing it, I decided that I wanted to write a speculative fiction book. So it was going to be along the lines of like a dystopian future, and it was going to be set in so-called, colonial Australia and had a mix of events, and the underlying theme was Islamophobia, really. And of course, Palestine will inevitably always come into it. But those were some of the things I was thinking about. But the more I kind of sat down to write about this spec fic book, the more that Jamila's story, and Jamila, of course, is the protagonist in my book, Songs for the Dead and Living. So the more I sat to write about this other book, the more Jamila came to me, and the more that her and her family and the characters insisted on being written out and being written out as a full story. So what was initially a short story for Racism ended up developing into much more than that. And I think ultimately the reason for that is, and it's so funny, you can start a story with one intention and one way, but then really once you just let it carry, you find yourself somewhere else entirely. And part of that was because I was thinking a lot about at the time about my journey and my healing and where I'm at, who I'm at, who I am, why do we do the things that we do? Like a confluence of things had to happen for decades to get to a point where Sara exists and Sara is here and Sara is doing what she's doing. So the more I thought about that, the more it led me to like my parents' journey and my grandparents' journey, ancestry and that kind of thread. So I was pulling all of these threads.
Is the book autobiographical? Is Jamila Sara?
No, it's not. But it's not. And look, you wouldn't be mistaken to ask that or to think that. And I've made sure in my kind of introductions and in speaking about it to say, look, it's not autobiographical, but it is very much inspired by my mother's migration story, and I share intersections and geographies with the character. The feelings in the book are definitely real. But ultimately, for me, it was like I was thinking about all these things. I was thinking about my parents and their journeys and their kind of origin stories, if you will. And that's what led me to this. I realized that, our whole life is almost a culmination or like a byproduct of a chain of events that started with, or, have started with particular incidents like the Nakba as one night, one event, or rather one night of exile for my family, one ongoing event. And that has shaped the trajectory of our entire lives. And so that for me was like the thing that I was fascinated by, and the kind of the ghosts of those questions were what was haunting me at the time. And that's what I wanted to answer.
It's really cool that there is space today for Palestinians telling Palestinian stories. For so long, as we've done, whether it's been in our advocacy work that we did together, Sara, or anything else, it's been spoken about us without us. But increasingly, we're commanding those spaces ourselves, taking them for ourselves. And it's great that a book like this can be published, because aside from yourself and Randa Abdel Fattah, we're not really getting a lot of Palestinian stories.
That's right. And I mean, I think for a long time, Palestinians, as you've said, Nasser, have been silenced and invisibilized and erased. That is the global entity that we are up against. It's invested in our erasure in every form, whether it's in academia or in arts or otherwise. And so it has been very difficult. But having said that, we have never actually been silent or invisibilized. That is a deliberate strategy. We have continued to share our stories, continued to be in different spaces, and continued to write and perform and to make and do art, right? So I think for me, what has been the shift is probably similar in politics. There has been a lot more space for these narratives, in large part, a space for these narratives and for like the shift in language, in large part due to First Nations activists and the staunch work of Black communities here. So, in the same way that in our advocacy, we are able to speak about colonialism and use that terminology a lot more freely without having to either silence ourselves or kind of really tiptoe around it or explain it at best. Now we can take for granted like the use of these words and say it, and also take for granted that almost that there is no debate that colonization, in these spaces, that colonization is taking place in fact, and that Israel is a settler colonial state in the same way that Australia is a colonial project. So I think it would be a mistake not to acknowledge that, a mistake at best and disingenuous at worst, not to say that I think we are definitely indebted to fierce Black artists and Black, activists here who have really created that space for us to be able to talk about Palestine and be unapologetic and continue to do what we were doing, but to have there be a lot more courage in the face of that as well.
Listeners, we're joined by Sara Saleh, an amazing woman, Palestinian, Lebanese, Egyptian author, polymath, poet, lawyer, all-round super duper star. Sara will be joining Anthony Lowenstein and Free Palestine Vic, so freepalestinevic.org. Go there to find out details of their upcoming talk, Tuesday the 5th of September. That's Tuesday coming, Human Rights in the Palestine Laboratory in the Age of Surveillance at 6:30 at RMIT. So make sure you get along and see Sara, Noura Mansour and Anthony Lowenstein. It's so important, Sara, for Palestinian stories to be spoken about by Palestinians. One of the realities of colonialism and refuge and dispersion is we're so busy living, surviving, struggling, that our art is not forefronted. For so long, particularly in Palestinian houses, you can be a doctor, a dentist, or a failure, or a lawyer, suggesting to your parents that you might want to pursue the arts.
Yeah.
You might want to pursue the arts would send them into convulsions and perhaps near-death experiences. A lot of the books, Palestinian books, of course, are non-fiction. They talk about the crimes that occur to us. Increasingly, as a genre, the Palestinians are embracing their art. And whether it's like Matar with her drawings and art, the cover of your book, Songs for the Dead and the Living, or your own work, or spoken word stuff that you've done, or increasingly the body of work in the fiction space, Palestinians are increasingly filling that space, telling our stories. Some of the fiction pieces I've read are filled with hope. Some of them end up in despair, but all of them are unique voices that speak to us, but also to a wider community and humanize us as people. Share with us a little bit of Jamila's story without giving away too much of the plot.
So Jamila's story starts with her family, actually. So it's like a lot of Palestinian families. It is a large and loving and chaotic Palestinian Lebanese family. So they're a mixed family that are living as undocumented people in Lebanon during the Civil War. And unfortunately, they are made to leave Lebanon, or they feel like they have to flee because of what's going on there in Beirut. And so I think for me, this was just another tragic experience of exile, from Palestine to Lebanon, and then from Lebanon to elsewhere, that the family have to contend with, and a further slip away from homeland and what that means to them as people who are no longer there, how they move in the world and their relationship with Palestine when they are so far from it. So the family is, the family story is told through the eyes of the young protagonist, the youngest daughter, Jamila, and she, like, most teenagers, is also someone who wants to chase her dreams and follow her friends and her life and her family and her love, rather, and figure out, like most teenagers do, figure out herself. And so she wants that freedom to do that, but at the same time is kind of stuck between that and the feelings that also she wants to feel feelings of safety and security and stability with her family. And again, these are things that are not common to them as a family, not known to them as a family, that have lived with a lot of uncertainty and in this kind of backdrop of exile and war and conflict. So what we end up finding with this book is we're following Jamila's journey from one side of the world to the other as she tries to figure out herself and find a place where she can be fully herself and fully free, and what that means for Palestinians, particularly in quote unquote diaspora, and who have mixed backgrounds as well. Because I've found that there aren't many novels that have dealt with that as well. The intricacies and the kind of the nuances of being fractured, being fragmented means that, there's a lot of marrying outside of kind of the Palestinian culture, what that means for the cause, for the upbringing, for identity, and how we contend with this. And ultimately, the fact that there really is no one correct way to be Palestinian, one correct way to show, that, and to embody that. And I think that for me was one of the kind of the main messages of this book as well.
In all I do, and increasingly as I get older, I feel a burden, a responsibility as a representative, as a leader, a community elder, whatever you want to call about it.
Mm.
Representation, does that weigh on you? I mean, you're charting a path now, creating a space that I look forward to those that sit behind you and what they will produce now that we're normalizing Palestinian voices and Palestinian art. Do you feel that sense of weight?
Definitely. I mean, again, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the work, of so many artists and activists and storytellers throughout our communities, who are either Palestinian or Palestinian allies, Palestinian adjacent. So a lot of incredible Arab, and there's a rich history of Arab activism in so-called Australia. So again, I think part of your earlier question, how did we get here and how are we creating the space, is also because of their tireless efforts and advocacy and work. And so I definitely stand on the shoulders of Palestinian artists like Randa Abdel Fattah, who you mentioned before, and countless others. But I also think what's so great is understanding that like there is room for all of these stories. There is abundance, and that we're not homogenous, and that there's space for us to be able to share these stories in a way where we're reflecting the diversity of our experiences, as I said earlier, and that there's no like one specific or right way to be Palestinian. And also really just being able to resist the inevitability of our grief and our loss, because we are more than just grief and loss. Like, yes, that is part of our journey and our experiences for a lot of us. Absolutely. Nakba is grief and loss, and is contending with that. But also we're a lot more than that. We are complex humans, complex Palestinians who get to feel other things like joy and family and love and travel and dream, and we were able to do all these things. And so a lot of us. And so I think that was an important part of the book as well, being able to explore those relationships and those joys in moments that are big moments of rupture, but also in the mundane.
Listeners, we've got Sara Saleh, who is talking about her book, Songs for the Dead and the Living. She'll be joining Anthony Lowenstein and Noura Mansour on Tuesday, the 5th of September at 6:30 p.m. at RMIT. Details at freepalestinevic.org, freepalestinevic.org. There'll be a link in the podcast. Human Rights in the Palestine Laboratory in the Age of Surveillance. Our matriarchs, our Palestinian women, it's past time, way past time for Palestinian men to get out of the way and let our Palestinian women take over. I've said that many times.
I wholeheartedly agree.
I'm ready to serve. There are many characters in the book, of course, but Teta Aisha, tell us a little bit about her.
Teta Aisha, I think, is definitely one of my favorite characters, if I was allowed to have a favorite character in the book. She is someone who, is a survivor of the Nakba and has lost, in the Nakba as well. And of course, Palestinians, our dispossession and the colonial project didn't start with Nakba, but it is one of the kind of the most significant events or commemorative events in our calendar. And again, as I said, an ongoing structure or event. And so we follow Teta's journey as she sort of survives the Nakba and spends a lot of her life contending with what that means for her. And again, people deal with trauma differently. And there are people who prefer not to talk about it. There's a lot of shame and a lot of silencing around that, around being exiled, being out of your home. And so, not having a home, so to speak, just being a burden on somewhere else, on someone else, somewhere else. And so Teta, for a lot of her life, spends it contending with these questions with these demons until she realizes that actually, whilst Palestinians, particularly those that have been exiled and have gone from place to place, don't always have kind of material or tangible heirlooms, we do have our memories and our stories of the people that we loved and of our homeland as well. And so she realizes that in order for her own like ability to reconcile her trauma and face it, she decides that she wants to share the story and she wants to pass it down to her granddaughters. And so we see that in the first, I guess, few chapters of the book. And I don't want to say much more, but she is definitely a metaphor for that. And I think she is in a really good place to teach them a few lessons before she departs. And that those lessons are, I think, I don't want to say what those lessons are, but I think those lessons are very special for Palestinians. And so I think that for me there was definitely a lot of joy writing those chapters as well.
Sara, you come from Western Sydney. I remember the first time I went to Western Sydney, my brothers are working in New South Wales, and we went there and I thought I was in Beirut. It didn't really feel like I was in Australia. What was it like growing up in the Arab community in Western Sydney? I mean, as a Peljipo? I don't know
Yeah.
Like.
What is the shortcut for that? I mean, it is a mouthful, and sometimes I just say Arab Australian. And I remember this one time you read my bio somewhere and you'd come to me and you were like, why did they call you Arab Australian? Are they erasing your Palestinianness? And you were so concerned. And I was like, no, Nasser, I actually asked them because sometimes it can be a mouthful and I get it. So, but it made me realize that, it's definitely, there is a sort of political impetus or motivation for saying that I'm Arab Australian, obviously, because part of that is solidarity as well, and understanding what the baggage of that identity is. Like it's loaded, and there's also a lot of issues, but there is also a reason why I want to deliberately own or put Palestine up front, because again, we are contending with this global entity that is trying to erase us and invested in our erasure. So in any case, as someone who I didn't exactly grow up in Western Sydney, but I have been someone who has been working in various spaces in and across Western Sydney for as long as I can remember. And also, I've been really lucky to be grown as an artist on Darug land, which is also parts of it, Western Sydney. And I think to me, that is worth acknowledging and honoring, always, again, being able to say that I was raised and grew my craft as an artist because of artists and Black artists and artists of color from Western Sydney is just as important for me to acknowledge in all that I do.
Now, I mean, I can write an email. I might even be able to write the odd op-ed. It's amazing to me how stories come to people like yourself, and whether it ends up being a poem, song, spoken word, or a book. Is there a way that you can explain that to like the lay person, our listeners, who might one day think there might be a novel in there?
I mean, that is such a lovely thing to say because I do believe that everyone has an artist in them and just what that artist looks like and what their art might be. And there's a lot to be said as well for doing something even if you're not necessarily good at it. You do it for the joy of the thing. You do it because you want, the thing as well. But having said that, yes, I think the good news is that writing can be learnt. There are writers who might inherently have, a bit more talent in the same way that we talk about sports and someone might be inherently a little bit more athletic than someone else. I do think there's that, but luckily you can, again, like most disciplines, learn and really just work hard and like work on your craft. So for me, I would never say that there's no hope or that someone can't be a writer. There's such thing as bad writing and there's such a thing as good writing, and you just have to, view it as a discipline and keep working at it. But it is hard work. It is.
Yeah, but I saw you on Facebook. You had like poems from when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Like I might have gone roses are red, violets are blue. I love
Oh,
you.
my
Job done.
poems weren't that great either. Like some of them were about the seasons. Like they were bad. They were bad.
No,
Really
they
bad.
weren't. They're so cool.
Yeah, I used to write songs, and I think that's the other thing too. I was very lucky to have parents who were very much invested in like storytelling and the arts as a means around the house. Again, it is as a means to like that's what we were brought up on. And also like the saying that Palestinians often march before they march before they learn to speak, and I think that to me me is like very similar in that we grew up in a household where I was always like, I grew up on a steady diet of quite literally Al Jazeera news and the Arabi like news presenter yelling in the background and like political opinions and stories almost constantly. So it was either that or, Arabic music and Fairuz and all the icons and like not to romanticize it, but again, like our art and our stories and our poems and our poetry, that's what I was really lucky enough to grow up on. And that was one of the few things that was not material that my parents were able to share with us. And so growing up in that environment and then having my parents, be really invested and spend their time like getting us books. I was always borrowing books from the library and begging my mom once a year to buy me those like expensive Scholastic books from the school newsletter. Like it was like Eid. And so just getting one of those books. And so, yeah, I was very lucky to have that. And before I was a writer, I was a reader.
I mean, it's a beautiful thing that increasingly as Palestinians, we're creating the space for our next generations to forefront our identity and our art and everything that is beautiful about Palestine. Listeners, you are listening to Sara Saleh. Come along Tuesday night, Human Rights and the Palestine Laboratory in the Age of Surveillance, Tuesday 6:30, details at freepalestinevic.org. Songs for the Dead and the Living. You have to come along and buy it just for the cover and get Sara to sign it. You will love the story, I'm sure. Sara, we've got a couple of minutes to go. Perhaps let's talk about the panel. What can attendees expect from yourself and Ant?
So on Tuesday, myself, Anthony, and Nora Mansour from APAN will be on this panel to talk all things Palestine in the age of surveillance. And I think there will definitely be a lot of talk around the shift in politics and the political situation, and as well as a little bit of talk of craft and the literary spaces that we occupy and that we're in. Because Anthony has been a writer for a long time, an investigative journalist, and that's his lens. And I, as someone who is an artist, a poet, a prose writer, I'm approaching storytelling and sharing stories about Palestine that way. So we really want to delve into that discussion and how do we talk Palestine? How do we share stories about Palestine, the language around it that's being used at the moment, and what that looks like. And the kind of the different experiences, effective storytelling, if you will. The other thing that I think people might be interested to hear about is the kind of the identity politics surrounding Palestine, and certainly the limits of that, identity politics. And I think the fact that ultimately there is a growing movement, both in kind of Jewish community spaces and of course in our spaces for a free Palestine, and so there's going to be a lot to get through in the hour or so, but that's what we're kind of hoping to be able to chat about next week or on Tuesday.
Fantastic. Listeners, we've been joined today by Sara Saleh, whose book Songs for the Dead and the Living is out. You can buy it. There'll be a link in the podcast for you to be able to buy it. You can come along on Tuesday and buy a copy there. Sara will sign it for you, and you will be able to put it as an heirloom and pass it on to your children. But so make sure.
Wow. Is there a more glorious hope or wish for a book? Honestly, Nasser, that was really apt and beautiful. Thank you so much.
Of course, Sara. Thank you. Tuesday at 6:30 at RMIT, Human Rights and the Palestine Laboratory in the Age of Surveillance, Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Details at freepalestinevic.org, freepalestinevic.org. Sara, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always such a treat to be able to chat to you, Nasser.
Listeners, thanks for listening. Tell your friends, share the podcast, and remember, there's never been a better time for a free Palestine.
Wise men say, only fools pressure.